Order. I will call Graham Downey to move the motion, and I will then call the Minister to respond. I remind other members that they may only make a speech with prior permission from the member in charge of the debate and the Minister. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention for a 30-minute debate. Order. Order. Graham Downey to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mrs Vaz. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce this debate and, as we've just seen in the past week, emphasise the importance of the Arctic and High North on UK security. The UK's geographic position, distance from fighting in Ukraine or Russian airborne or drone incursions in Estonia or Poland, can lead to people feeling the threat from Vladimir Putin is someone else's problem. However, we sit at the gateway to one of the most vital pieces of real estate on the planet, the High North and the Arctic. And that gives us an outsized importance, but also puts us at potential threat. The Harvard Arctic Initiative's new report on power shifts and security in the region highlights how the rules-based order is being challenged in the Arctic, just as it is elsewhere around the world. Melting ice is opening new shipping routes and unlocking potentially vast reserves of oil, gas and minerals. I'm happy to give way to my friend.
Madam Chair, first of all, can I commend the honourable member for bringing this forward? He's absolutely right to bring the issue of the melting ice, so whether it be climate change or whether it be that the ice is melting, and it's a key issue, can't be ignored. Does the honourable member not agree that the melting ice makes this route more accessible, and that means that we have forewarning, and to be forewarned means forearmed? Does he agree that it's past time that we as NATO members took the Chinese and the Russian threat in a much more serious way in this area? And we must immediately enhance cold water capabilities and ensure that our strength and ability is equal to any threat which may emerge from any other country. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I totally agree with him. I've come on to cover both of those points about the challenges that we face in the Arctic from both of those powers and what indeed we should do to...
Minerals is my friend.
I'm happy to wait to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend, the member for Dunfermline Dollar. He's making an excellent speech, and I want to thank him for securing today's debate. A recent article in The Guardian highlighted how UK-based companies continue to shamefully be part of the supply chain for Europe's imports of LNG from Russia. Whilst I'm pleased that the UK has committed this year to transitioning towards a ban on the provisions of the maritime services for vessels carrying Russian LNG, does my honourable friend agree that the UK should work with its European allies to phase out dependency on Russian LNG entirely and to identify where we continue to have high dependencies on adversarial and unreliable Arctic in the High North?
Thank my honourable friend for his comment, and I absolutely agree with him. We must do more on all of those points. Russia seeks to dominate these Arctic routes militarily and economically, while China positions itself as a near-Arctic state, investing in infrastructure and shipping lanes to secure influence over future trade corridors. Madam Chair, we must understand our geography and prepare ourselves to reflect our position as a frontline country in a new, unstable and increasingly violent world. We must help the British public understand that what Vladimir Putin chooses to do anywhere will harm their lives on a daily basis. When he illegally and brutally invaded Ukraine in 2022, it was our most vulnerable constituents that paid the price through increased energy bills. Any action he takes in the future will hurt those same people the most, and it is the first duty of government to protect them. The subsea cables and energy assets in the North Sea are not abstract. They are national lifelines underpinning energy supply, jobs and our digital economy, and disruption to these systems would have immediate consequences for households and businesses across the UK. Madam Chair, I've asked written questions of both the Minister of Defence and DESNES about steps to defend physical energy and infrastructure assets. As a senior member of the energy industry put it to me, if a Russian submarine appears next to one of our installations, who do I call? We know Russia does understand the importance of the High North and Arctic because we're seeing a new and unprecedented military build-up. Reports of new air bases in Murmansk, increased deployment of air defence systems and a new fleet of ice-capable vessels for Arctic power projection. Vladimir Putin is not retreating. He is acting deliberately to rebuild what he sees as a large Russian empire. Madam Chair, during a recent visit to Estonia, I heard how land and maritime forces, cyber capabilities and other hybrid tactics threaten the Baltic nations. Estonians were also very clear that peace in Ukraine, while of course welcome and something we should all be working towards, would not end the threat to Europe. Putin will not exist as a quiet European neighbour, As he sees it, he must maintain Russia's prestige by joining the global competition alongside the US and China. He will not allow Russia to be seen as a secondary power. He will redeploy and reinforce in what he sees as his sphere of influence. As the upgrades I mentioned made clear, one of his priorities will be in the UK's own backyard of the High North. And the peace that we all want to see in Ukraine would not reduce the threat to the UK. It could increase it, and we must be prepared for that. And that brings me to the action last week to seize the Russian-flagged tanker Maninera in the North Atlantic. Actions I fully support and hope we see additional action in the future over the Russian shadow fleet. That demonstrated the effective cooperation between the US and UK and the increased capability we can bring to bear. However, it also comes with warnings. First, the UK must show how it can defend its interests in the area alone, as well as with our allies.
On that point, with my honourable friend, I thank my honourable friend for again giving way. He continues to make an excellent speech. The Trump administration has shifted both words and power to highlight the challenge in the Arctic and High North from Russia and China. However, the United States itself drew down its peripatetic deployments, Air Force deployments across the Greenland, Iceland-UK gap over recent years. Europe and the UK have not covered the gap with fixed deployments despite its proximity to our borders, and as the honourable member made clear, this is something that we must do independently, protecting Europe from Russia and to maintain our open sea lines of communication. Does my honourable friend agree that given the UK's nuclear submarine enterprise and our leadership role in the Joint Expeditionary Force, the UK and Europe must take the lead in protecting and securing the Greenland and Iceland gap?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my honourable friend once again for an excellent intervention. And that is 2 points I will come on to as to why the UK must act, yes, independently, but also with our European allies in the High North and the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap in particular. We must always remember that Putin will respond to actions, not to words, and we cannot afford to sleepwalk unprepared into a geopolitical High North and Arctic. Second, as with any bully, Putin will feel the need to retaliate after the actions last week, but it might not be against the big kid of the USA. He could act against the UK. Madam Chair, that is not something that should make us scared, but it should highlight that we must be ready for a response from Russia in one domain or another and make sure we respond and are able to respond and defend ourselves effectively. Madam Chair, I commend ministers for initiatives to strengthen our armed forces, including raising service pay, bringing housing back under public control and strengthening industrial partnerships across the UK. As my honourable friend mentioned, we've also seen increased investment in the Joint Expeditionary Force working with High North allies, something that on visits to Estonia and to the US last year were mentioned in both cases as being something that the UK should continue to do to solve effective security measures as actions, not merely words. I will give way to my friend.
I'm grateful. He talks about our High North allies. I've just been next door with Niall Nathanielson, Greenland's Minister responsible for energy and mineral resources. Given that Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, and Denmark is a founder member of NATO, does he agree with me that the security of Greenland is a matter for all of NATO and not a matter for unilateral action from the United States?
Thank the honourable friend for his intervention. I couldn't agree with him more. The UK's position should be very clear. Greenland's future is to be determined by people in Greenland and by absolutely no one else. These initiatives, however, in the UK, Madam Chair, must be matched with urgency and sustained funding. We must see a clear path to the 3.5% plus 1.5% of defence spending agreed at the NATO summit in The Hague. We need a defence investment plan as quickly as possible, and one which commits the UK to force development that will genuinely and truly give Vladimir Putin a moment of pause. May I just two seconds, please? Failure to do both of these things will leave the UK and our people at risk. I'll give way to the gentleman.
Thank you for allowing me to intervene. I wonder if you could encourage the Prime Minister or indeed the Minister to move a bit further forward and a bit quicker in committing to increasing our expenditure on our defence force. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I believe that's what I did. I certainly hope that is what I did. I would certainly like to see things move much faster and in a way which is very much more clear about the UK's defence posture and our intentions. However, Madam Chair, to justify that action, the British people do need to understand the threat that we face. and that must start from the very top of government and carry on continually. More effective defence spending is in some ways the ultimate in preventative spending. The cost of not being prepared will lead to increased instability, hybrid attacks on the UK, or encourage future Russian aggression in Europe. All of that will increase the day-to-day costs of government and the bills of ordinary people. It could also lead to an armed conflict with Russia that would be truly devastating for our country and the world. Acting with strength now is the only way to prevent those awful consequences. Madam Chair, with the increased threat to the High North, Arctic and North Sea, I would also ask the Government to consider increased use of assets on the east coast of the country, such as Rosyth or DM Crombie in my own constituency. This would improve response times, resupply capability and deterrence posture. And such a move would demonstrate that the UK is serious about defending its northern approaches and critical infrastructure. We should value our relations with the US, but Europe must also show it is able to respond alone or with only limited US support. In a piece last week entitled "Greenland is Europe's Strategic Blind Spot and Its Responsibility," Justina Bugden-Fraley of the Atlantic Council said that Europe must have a presence monitoring the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, which was referred to earlier on by my honourable friend, and deny Russia and China the ability to encroach further on the Arctic region. Action is already being taken by both Norway and Denmark, while across Europe, Poland is laying mines and digging trenches in preparation for a Russian invasion. Germany has recently confirmed £50 billion of spending on new conventional military equipment. We've also had the instances of Russian aircraft encroaching on NATO airspace in Estonia, and Estonia triggering Article 4 consultation from NATO as a result as well. Madam Chair, the UK must match the urgency of our European allies, and I come back to the point I made at the very beginning. We are not a country distant from conflict. Just like Estonia or Poland, the UK is a front-line nation, and that front line is in the High North and the Arctic. I'm happy to give one.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for giving way and for bringing this important debate, and commend him on his speech. He's listed a large number of incidents across Europe of hybrid warfare and in many cases physical attacks by Russia. But actually we've also seen in the UK Russian-sponsored attacks on Ukrainian drone suppliers. And actually I think to his broader point, the British public needs to be aware that actually that war is already on our borders.
On his intervention again. Once again, I couldn't agree more with him. I think going back to the poisonings in Salisbury, the UK public need to be very aware that Vladimir Putin is a threat to our shores, has been in the past, is now and will be in the future, and it will be the most vulnerable people in the UK who will pay the price of that aggression, and that's why we must make sure that we are responding with force and clear action and not merely with words. Madam Chair, Vladimir Putin's regime is undoubtedly a criminal enterprise masquerading as a government, and its aggression must be met with strength. Putin's ambition is clear: to dominate and rebuild Russian influence across his perceived empire, and he reacts to action, not to mere talk. Madam Chair, delay is not defence. We cannot wait for threats to emerge before we act. And I look forward to hearing from the Minister as what the UK Government is doing to meet those threats today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a delight to be here speaking under your chairmanship. Let me begin by thanking the member for Dunfermline and Dollar for securing this debate and for all the work he does as chair of the Labour Backbench Defence Committee. In an article published last week, he just stressed the critical importance of these volatile times, of strengthening the UK's armed forces, preparing for the possibility of war, and showing that although we don't want conflict, we are ready to fight to defend our freedoms and indeed prosperity. And he is, of course, absolutely correct. And speaking to an area of the world which he is all too familiar, geography really matters. Whilst some members within the SNP may not be interested in defence because of Scotland and its geographical position, our adversaries are interested in Scotland because of what it offers to the UK, Europe and NATO defence.
May I intervene on that point? Given that one of the UK's core NATO responsibility is securing freedom of operation in the GI-UK gap, can the Minister reflect on what an SNP-led independent Scotland would mean for that task? At a time when hostile states exploit political fragmentation, does he agree that a party which opposes the nuclear deterrent, has turned away defence-related industrial investment on the Clyde, and has even restricted medical aid to Ukrainian soldiers by classifying it as military support, would weaken our collective resilience in the High North rather than strengthen it? Thank you.
In response to the member's comments, the reality is this isn't actually about politics. This is about sincerity around our national security decisions. And the reality is an independent Scotland would weaken the security not just of the UK, not just of Scotland, not just of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but it would weaken the whole of European security architecture and NATO as a whole. And at this point in time, there couldn't be any worse decision to possibly even fathom. There was also some comments earlier about whether we have a front line with Russia. Well, the reality is we do. And as the honourable member mentioned, it sits in the North Atlantic. What I would say is when it comes to being scared of Russia, and last time I checked the military dictionary, that word definitely didn't exist. And if someone from industry has seized a Russian frigate or a submarine near the CNI, close to it, I can guarantee that there will be a Royal Navy, NATO or European submarine or frigate very close by. Now, although much of the current attention is focused on Ukraine, being ready to fight means being alert to every danger, we must continue working ever more closely with our allies to address emerging threats, wherever they may arise. And today's debate is a welcome opportunity to discuss a part of the world that's becoming increasingly contested by the major powers. Largely inaccessible to navies in the past, the high north and Arctic is changing at an unprecedented and accelerating rate. Global warming is transforming the Arctic from frozen expanses to 21st century geopolitical hotspot. And as melting ice opens up new sea routes, the established security balance across the top of the world will be fundamentally reshaped forever. Routes between the Atlantic and the Pacific will become increasingly navigable for more time of the year, bringing the continents of Asia, Europe and North America closer than ever before. Competition to exploit the region's valuable natural resources is growing too. China is extending its activity into the Arctic, having recently sent more icebreakers and research vessels to probe its expanses, declaring itself as a near-Arctic state. And we're under no illusion about how the changing Arctic environment poses new challenges, both commercially and militarily. Russia remains the most acute danger to the security of the northern Euro-Atlantic, and its operations within a more navigable Arctic are an increasing part of that threat. It's sobering to realise that Vladimir Putin controls over half of the entire Arctic's coastline. The increased militarisation of Russia's Arctic territory, including investment in bases and air and coastal defence capabilities, is of increasing and growing concern. For example, Russia has established a new Northern Joint Strategic Command, reopening Cold War-era bases above the Arctic Circle, including a fully operational base on Franz Josef Island and another on Cottony Island. In the North Atlantic, Russian submarine activity is nearing the highest levels since the Cold War. As one of the Arctic's nearest neighbours, changes in this region directly impact us here in the UK and our security, whether from increasing threats or damage to subsea electricity or telecommunication cables in the Baltic Sea, or the increase in Russian activity in the key Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, involving surface and subsurface vessels and, of course, aircraft.
Anna Gelder.
Honourable and gallant friend for giving way. And on that point, as climate change opens new routes and access to resources, and as one of the Arctic's closest neighbours, how is the government working with allies to strengthen our collective security in the region in the face of climate change, ensuring the UK is able to protect our long-term interests alongside other partners from non-Arctic states?
So as the honourable friend will know, that we have various multilateral treaties, including obviously working with the GEF and NATO to ensure any implications from global warming, of which I just mentioned, are carefully considered and security recommendations are put in place to deal with them should they arise. Now, NATO has made clear that defence of the High North is a key strategic imperative. The addition of Sweden and Finland to the alliance has significantly strengthened NATO's hand in the region. Indeed, Nordic countries have spent decades managing Moscow's interests in the High North and bringing valuable experience to help counter the threat that Putin's forces present today. As part of the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force, we're working alongside them to enhance collective security across Northern Europe. We have assets across all three main services, interoperability with our allies, which can project force deep into the High North. For example, a recent agreement between Britain and Norway will see our commando forces, led by the Royal Marines, operating in Norway all year round to defend NATO's northern flank. They'll take part in exercise Cold Response, the largest military exercise in Norway this year, with a 40% increase in Royal Marine activity. I know that exercise well. In 2022, I took part in it as the Chief of Staff of the UK Strike Force, operating a multinational fleet, dozens of ships, aircraft and thousands of forces all across the Arctic. And I spent time during my past 24 years, many of it unhappy, in a snow hole, in the Arctic as part of the Royal Marines as a mountain leader. So we train hard for these operations in the Arctic. We have some of the best troops in the world, and we work exceptionally hard with both Norway, Sweden and Finnish forces. What's more, we've established the Littoral Maritime Response Force with dedicated personnel ships and helicopters operating in the High North. We've bought new generation anti-submarine frigates. We've just completed a huge deal with the Norwegians to ensure interoperability across our Type 26 fleet. And we've launched a groundbreaking Atlantic Bastion programme to protect the UK and Russian undersea threats. All part of widespread and regular operations involving our armed forces to maintain operational readiness across Northern Europe. The MOD keeps Russia's military posture in the region under continuous review and wider strategic monitoring with our allies. Of course, we recognise that Russia is an Arctic state with a legitimate presence, but we have to be clear that we will protect and, if necessary, assert our rights to safeguard security and international law. This includes honouring the integrity.
John Slinger.
I thank my honourable friend. I too was at the APPG for Greenland meeting in a room very nearby, where we heard Greenland's Minister for Business, Mineral Resources, Energy, Justice and Gender Equality speaking. And in addition to the very important points he's making about military strength and prowess of this country and others, and our alliances, does he agree with me that we need to send a very strong message about international law and the international rules-based system, and that would give reassurance to the High North and the Arctic countries, particularly Greenland, at this moment?
I completely agree with the honourable friend, and I think our Prime Minister has done exactly that, that the only people to decide the future of Greenland are those in Greenland, and that NATO as a whole provides a collectively security agreement for NATO, for Greenland and other countries within the High North. Now, I think we can't be naive about the challenges we face. For example, the threat of damage to subsea electricity and telecommunication cables is an ongoing concern and underlines the importance of really close collaboration and interoperability with our European partners. Very simply, there can be no global security without security across the Arctic and Northern Europe. Now, to move on to the points of Greenland, these last few weeks have seen an increasing focus on Greenland as a whole in the context of Arctic security. But the UK has been absolutely and utterly clear. The future of Greenland is a matter for the Greenlanders and the Danes and no one else. Greenland, Denmark and the United States have worked closely since the Second World War to ensure that this key territory is protected from various aggressors, and that will always continue. Security in the Arctic must therefore be achieved collectively with NATO allies, including the United States, by upholding the principles of the UN Charter.
Order. There's a division. I'm not sure how many votes there are, but we'll come back after 15 minutes. I think the Minister, you've got a few minutes left to speak. Order. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll finalise that security in the Arctic must therefore be achieved by collectively, with NATO allies, including the United States, by upholding the principles of the UN Charter on sovereignty, territorial integrity and inviolability of borders. These are universal principles and will always defend them. It's worth noting that we've already completed exercise Terrassus, one of the biggest exercises in the High North, late last year. The next set of exercises in the High North are Lion Protector. We have a Jeff Shods meeting coming up at the end of this week. Cold response will take place and is already really underway, with 40% increase in the Royal Marines deployed in the High North that will be there all year round. The RAF continue to patrol in the High North with various types of aircraft. And then some of the bilateral outstanding agreements, such as the Lunar House Agreement, has established interoperability like never before across our naval forces, in particular with Norway.
Al Pinkerton.
For giving way. He has previously, prior to our brief interruption, described a part of the world that is undergoing considerable change and turbulence, not least from climate change. And I wonder whether the Minister would be able to reflect on how UK procurement, UK military doctrine might also have to go through a similar scale and rapidity of change in order to respond and reflect the challenges of an increasingly liquefied Arctic and no longer in a frozen state.
Minister.
I think for a long time during the Cold War, a large proportion of our time was predisposed looking to the high northeast and northwest in the Atlantic and the high north. I think it's a case of actually relearning some of our old lessons and ensuring that our capability and technological mix is adapted within our doctrine, training tactics and procedures. For example, some of the work going on cold response as a whole now is not necessarily about training, it's about actual mission set planning to prepare for the worst case scenario. And that's how we're seeing it evolve through time. And I think that will continue through Lunar House and the various agreements we have, obviously with Sweden and Finland now as part of the NATO alliance. So it will continue to get stronger. And importantly, never forgetting the JEF as well, which is a super important geopolitical alliance. So to sum up, Madam Chair, politically and environmentally, the Arctic is in absolute flux. Rising temperatures are remoulding landscapes and turning centuries of certainty indeed on their head. As the region grows increasingly contested, it's more important than ever for Britain to collaborate with like-minded states to uphold international law and strengthen our collective security. That's precisely what we are doing. We are working intensely with our partners to monitor threats, bolster our forces and stand up for our interests. And as we boost defence spending to 5% of GDP over the next decade, protecting the stability and security of the High North and Arctic will be integral to our plans. That's how we'll keep Britain secure at home and strong abroad.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered the impact of the Arctic and High North on UK security. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Can I just thank the Honourable Lady for reminding us all
until 4:55.
And so we're suspending this until 4:55.